Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
All right, Pete, welcome back.
Hey, Ethan.
Tell us what we've got today. Tell our listeners what we've got today.
So, I heard some hilarious news today. Or not today, but recently. So, it was announced that Star Trek 4 just got greenlit by the studios and that everyone's on board. But what's funny about that is that the director, I think it was J.J. Abrams, announced it, and all the actors had no idea.
So Chris Pine had no idea he was coming back.
Chris Pine didn't know. Carl Urban didn't know. Zoe
Simon
Saldana
Pegg
didn't know. Simon Pegg. None of these people knew. But then all of a sudden it was announced, oh, by the way, we're doing Star Trek 4 and everyone's coming back.
All right.
So I found that quite interesting and hilarious. I mean, they've always wanted to do it, but it's just been such a long break with no news, right? Because rumors were last that Quentin Tarantino wanted to direct one of these episodes, one of these shows. Yeah, he wanted to do the next Star Trek movie, which I think would have been an interesting movie, right?
Yeah. So how big of a Star Trek fan are you? I mean, I know that you're super into sci-fi. I know that, you know, for Star Wars, you would fight to the death to defend it. Where are you in terms of your fandom for Star Trek?
So I am not as high on Star Trek as I am on other sci-fi movies or shows.
Okay.
But I give Star Trek a lot of respect because it really, for me, is like the grandfather of modern sci-fi shows.
Yeah.
The original series, you know, Star Trek TOS, the original series with William Shatner, was really the starting point for modern day sci-fi. And I'm, you know, of course there's lots of other sci-fis in the past, you know, sci-fi shows in the past, but realistically speaking, I think a lot of the themes and a lot of the ideas that came out of Star Trek with William Shatner, we can see that today. And it, of course, with not just in the show, not in just terms of the other Star Trek shows, but in terms of other sci-fi shows as well.
Can I just give you 3 quick hitter facts and tell me if they blew your mind the same way they blew mine? So I agree. The original Star Trek, right? James T. Kirk, right? Which is William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy as Spock, right? Dr. McCoy, Scotty, Sulu, Chekhov, right? That was premiered in 1966.
Yeah.
And to my shock, it was only on for 3 seasons, a total of 79 episodes, which is actually quite a lot of episodes for only 3 seasons. But for me, I never would have guessed it started in 66. I would have guessed 76. And I'm really shocked it was only 3 seasons. I would have guessed like 12 seasons.
Yeah.
So that, to put it in perspective, is how long Star Trek has been around, which dramatically predates Star Wars, right? 1979, A New Hope.
That's right. That's right. So when I first heard that, I too was blown away.
Yeah.
But I think that's a testament to Star Trek just being so pervasive and, again, so relatively modern, right? You wouldn't have thought, when you think of the original show now, yes, I also think 70s, I also think maybe early 80s, right? I don't think of it as a show that came out 10 plus years before Star Wars.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So I think, and the fact of the matter remains that despite it's only having 3 seasons, it had such a huge cultural impact that it did spawn, right? 6 movies plus animated shows, plus then now all the different franchises we're seeing today.
Oh man. I mean, I think that's probably one of the reasons that maybe you and I are less enthusiastic Star Trek fans than Star Wars fans, is that for me, Star Wars follows a very clear narrative both in terms of the timeline, in terms of the characters, and then there's a lot of spin-offs, right?
Yeah.
Mandalorian, Boba Fett, Rogue One. If you kind of know the original Star Wars story, all those other things kind of fall into place and make sense. Whereas Star Trek is really more of a not a franchise, but it's more of a premise, right? And there's so many different, even like the television series. I had to go back and just kind of put them all in perspective. I had no idea what the difference was between Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Next Generation, Enterprise, Discovery, Picard. Like, we can get to those in a bit, but I could rattle all of those off. I didn't know what order they were in. And to be honest, I didn't know how they related to each other. And maybe that's my ignorance, but also maybe that's just because the Star Trek franchise has so much more television and kind of standalone shows that it's more difficult for me to put in perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think it would be safe to say that we both grew up in the Next Generation era, not in the Shatner era, right?
Patrick Stewart.
When we think, that's right.
Jean-Luc
When
Picard,
we think of Star Trek, our first live, or let's say current interaction with Star Trek would have been the Next Generation with Worf and
Riker,
Geordi and
Data,
Riker, all of these guys, right?
Yeah.
I think that's our generation.
Yeah. The next generation.
The next generation, right? Our parents' generation is probably more aligned with the Shatner era.
Yes.
Right? So that's why I still don't have as much appreciation, at least on a base level, right? Academically, I understand that the first series was really groundbreaking, right?
Yeah.
It had the first interracial kiss on television ever broadcast. Is that right?
Oh, that's interesting.
I think I hope I'm right in saying this, but I seem to remember that the kiss between Uhura and and Kirk was the first broadcast on national television kiss between a white actor and a black actor.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Good trivia. Very good trivia.
So I think that's, so again, cultural impact, I think, of course, that has more of an effect. But because, frankly, we grew up and we were born later, for us, I think I still have a deep love and appreciation for Patrick Stewart's TNG, Next Generation Star Trek show. And then, of course, you have all the other, not spin-offs, because, again, they were more continuations of this premise, as you very aptly put it, right?
That's right.
Which is to say, then you had Voyager come out, which was about exploring the Delta Quadrant, which we had heard about. What I think Star Trek did, which was really interesting and good, was it laid the groundwork for other shows, but it didn't force those other shows, right? Yeah. And so when Voyager did come out, everyone was like, well, why would I want to watch this when I could see Picard? And then they're talking about how it's all about what happens in the Delta Quadrant. Yeah. And then everyone's like, oh, wait, I've heard of the Delta Quadrant. It was mentioned in the Next Generation, but we don't know anything about it. And then Janeway can explore that. Or when they're talking about the Borg, and you're just like, wait a minute, I remember the Borg from not just the TNG shows, but also from the TNG movies, which was also very good. So, it very subtly tied all of these shows together in one unified universe.
When you describe it like that, you're describing MCU, right?
Yeah.
You're really describing Marvel. Before Marvel, where they had themes, right? And then they used that theme to support a new show, right?
So I think what Marvel, don't get me wrong, Marvel has done a very good job of it, but I think Marvel was a little, or especially now, has become a little ham-fisted about it, because it's kind of like they want you to remember that we're in this shared universe, so they throw cameos or references to other movies in all of these, and it so much so that you're just kind of like, okay, we get it. You know,
Yeah.
we're 30 movies into this Odyssey now. We don't need you to throw it in our face. We get it. You're a connected universe. Right?
Okay, we get it.
I think Star Trek, in that regard, was much more subtle, right? Where they said, look, we're going to... And it's almost like what they did with CSI. I don't know if you remember the original CSI shows.
I do remember Crime Scene Investigation.
So
Yes.
when you had CSI, the first one was set in Vegas. And then when they did their first spin-off, which was CSI Miami, right? How they integrated that was they had a crossover with David Caruso, who's the lead of CSI Miami, come on to one of the episodes of CSI Vegas. And so that's how they kind of naturally implemented CSI Miami. And then when they had the second spinoff, CSI New York, they had the lead of CSI New York, I don't even remember who it was, come on to David Caruso went from Miami to New York, and they had one case that connected the two. Oh. And then they had CSI Miami. CSI New York. And it was just, that was a little bit less subtle because it was only three different spin-offs.
Yeah.
But like Star Trek, I think they did a very good job where they were just like, listen, here, we're going to do Deep Space Nine. Oh, guess what? Worf from TNG is here.
Yeah.
Right? We see an episode where Riker is here.
Yeah.
And then in Voyager, we're going to have communications with the Borg, which were already introduced in the Star Trek TNG and in the movies. So it was, I don't know, I just felt like it was a connected universe, and it was a connected universe that was a little more subtly well laid out.
Mm-hmm. So if we put them chronologically,
okay.
It came, The Next Generation came out in 1987. For 7 seasons. And that's, again, what we discussed, which is Patrick Stewart as Picard. Then Deep Space Nine came right at the tail end, started in 1993 for another 7 seasons. And then Star Trek Voyager overlapped more with Deep Space Nine because that started in 1995, also for 7 seasons. So those 3 combined 21 seasons. And then after that, Enterprise came. But Enterprise wasn't until 2001, and that was only 4 seasons.
And if I remember correctly, Enterprise is actually a prequel, so it predates, even though it comes out later, chronologically in the real world. But in terms of the lore, it's the first of all of them. I think it even before the original series.
Absolutely right. So you're right. If we're doing a timeline, it would be Enterprise before the William Shatner original. Then William Shatner original comes. Then in 100 years after that, it's The Next Generation, which immediately leads into Deep Space Nine, which immediately leads into Voyager. So that's a chronology of that.
Yeah.
Then
now you have Discovery. Which I don't know where that plays because I didn't even bother watching Discovery because the reviews have been very not good about it.
I have to say, I saw maybe just in passing. My dad was a huge Trekkie. So just in passing, I saw like on the screen a lot of Next Generation, probably Deep Space Nine. Voyager I know only because of Jerry Ryan, which we can get to in a bit. And Enterprise, I don't think I've ever saw. But I picked up Discovery when it came out, which is 2017. I think I probably watched the first 2 seasons. I thought it was actually quite decent. Decent. But it's been out for 4 seasons, it said, but I think I only saw the first 2. It was pretty good. But I would say that was pretty good science fiction. It didn't really strike me as a Star Trek show. Does that make sense?
And I think that is I think the crutch of why a lot of people had a problem with it.
Yeah. I don't consider that a Star Trek show.
I don't want to get into the political correctness thing because there's there's a lot of people who are, let's say small-minded. I don't want to make accusations, but there's a lot of people who didn't like it for the wrong reasons.
Okay. I don't know
The
what those
reason
are, but
I
fine.
haven't bothered watching it is because I heard that it is not really a Star Trek show. It's a Star Trek show only in name only,
Yep. I
not
agree
in
with that.
terms of action.
I agree with that.
Right.
I mean, there's obviously references to the Klingons and to the Vulcans and all the other kind of characters, but I agree. It's a very good science fiction show. I don't feel like it's necessarily Star Trek.
Which, my hot take of this episode is that's the same way I feel about Picard. Don't get me wrong, I love the show, but I don't think it's a Star Trek show.
Yeah, so let's do a side note. You love Picard though, right? I think you told me that you love... There's only 2 seasons. It started in 2020. You said you loved the first season, right?
I saw the first season, and so it was one of those things where, it's like... watching Picard at the time was like eating fast food or junk food.
Oh.
Awesome and amazing when you first watch it and enjoy it, but then in the aftermath you're kind of regretting all those decisions.
Then the stomach rot. Then the stomach rot sets in.
And that's kind of how I felt about Picard, because I think I got blinded a lot by the visual effects. It was gorgeous.
Yeah.
Lots of lens flares, lots of beautiful vistas.
Yeah.
And B, I actually got really blindsided by the nostalgia. Like I didn't realize how much I missed seeing the squad on screen together.
Yeah.
Right? I thought like watching Picard show up on screen and then seeing Data in the final episodes, and then seeing Riker and oh my God, what's her name? Not
7 of
Tasha.
9? Not 7 of 9.
No. It was 7 of 9 was also on there. The one he marries. Oh my God, the Beta Zoid. Oh my God.
Troy,
Deanna Troy.
Yeah.
Because they get married and they have their home life, and I was just like, it really tugged at the heartstrings, and I was so happy to see all that.
Yeah.
But then when you sit down and really try to look at it objectively, my God, every other word coming out of every person's mouth was a curse word.
Oh,
There's
really?
action. It was action galore, which is great. But like, for me, Star Trek, the difference between Star Trek and Star Wars, everyone always said, well, what's the big difference, right? And I always used to say, hey, in Star Wars, people settle their differences with blaster fire. In Star Trek, people settle their settle their differences with either negotiations or strategy and tactics. Right? It's always been a little bit more diplomatic. Star Trek has always been more like a war of words, not a war of actual guns.
That's really profound. That's really profound. Thanks, Pete. Taught me something.
Hey, you're welcome. So I've always liked Star Trek because it was so much. It was a series that had lots of great action sequences. Don't get me wrong. You can like, if you think of any of the Star Trek movies, you can think of at least 1 or 2 fantastic action sequences. But it was always, Picard's goal was always, how do I diffuse this situation? How do I follow the Prime Directive? How do I make sure that everybody around this table wins, right? They were always looking for a win-win solution. They were never looking for a we win, you lose solution.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I really liked about Star Trek. It was really a diplomatic effort in sci-fi, which I thought was at that time, especially not really well seen. Right. And you had all these and even the original series, you had Spock saying deeply profound things and highlighting deeply profound aspects of life. Right. You don't get that in Picard. Because it's a lot, like there's a little bit of espionage, there's a little bit of subterfuge, but there's a lot of cursing, there's a lot of swearing, there's a lot of sex, there's a lot of things which obviously are real to the world of Star Trek.
So help me understand, where did Picard come from? Was it Patrick Stewart who's like, I really miss this role, I want this role again, or I really need a paycheck, or the fans were like, we just need to see more Picard, bring back Patrick Stewart. Where do you think the demand for this came from?
I think it comes from all of that, except for the fact that I need a paycheck. Patrick Stewart, steady stream of work. He's, especially with the X-Men universe, he's now in the franchise movies. He had the Star Trek franchise behind him. He had the X-Men series franchise behind him. He's, when he's not in film, he's doing a lot of Broadway and stage productions in New York and in London. He's not hurting for work, right? And if you look at it that way, that's, I think, the difference between like Western American or Hollywood actors versus British actors. British actors come up from the theater system, mostly, on average, right? So they have a lot of work that they can come back to. They can always fall back to theater work, which is how Patrick Stewart got these roles, right? Is like he's known for being a Shakespearean actor here. Yeah. Or at least he has a good reputation for it. So I don't think it was him calling up Paramount and saying, hey, let's do a revival because I'm broke and I need to make my next house payment. I just don't see that. Of course it could be, but I just don't see it.
Yeah. So I mean, you made a very good point about the kind of the distinction between the Star Wars and Star Trek franchises. There's, I mean, maybe not such an obvious distinction, or maybe it's not such a academic distinction, but Star Wars is until recently a film and book franchise, right? Whereas Star Trek is a television franchise that then went into movies very late. Like the first movie, which to be honest, I don't ever think I saw, was Star Trek the Motion Picture in 1979. I have no idea what that is.
After the series ended.
Yeah.
After
13 years. Yeah. They came back and made a movie, and apparently it wasn't great. Did you ever see it? I never saw it.
No. I saw, so I didn't see the first. So, okay. I've seen bits and pieces of all of them. Yeah. The only ones that I specifically remember watching end to end, and even now the storyline's a bit fuzzy, was Wrath of Khan, the sequel, the second film.
Yes.
And I don't remember which one it is in the series, but it's the one where they go back in time to kidnap some whales.
Oh man, I love that one. That is number 4, The Voyage Home.
Yeah, so that's the those are the two that I remember seeing end to end.
Yes.
And again, don't if you ask me about plot details and plot points, I'll be super fuzzy. I remember the vague plot points, and that's it. And then the others, I do remember that the last movie introduced a character that was referenced to in the TNG shows. And the first TNG movie also introduced, or not introduced, but had Picard meet with Kirk, with Shatner in it. So that way, if you look at it that way, that first TNG movie, I think it was Generations, was really a bridging movie between the original series and the new series, New Generation.
There's a surprising number. I mean, we think of, or at least I think of the cinema as kind of the reboot. I don't know if it's called the reboot, with Chris Pine playing James Kirk, right? Or young James Kirk. Kind of, right? And we should get into that timeline, but there's a lot of movies even before that. We mentioned, the original 1979, the motion picture. You and I don't know anything about that. Star Trek II is Wrath of Khan, 1982. And remember, that's got that very emotional scene at the end where Spock dies of like the exposure to the radiation, remember?
Yep.
Yeah, which is super sad scene. Then 3 is A Search for Spock, which I don't remember seeing. That's 1984.
Sure.
Then 1986 is The Voyage Home. This is with the whales. So it goes 82, 84, 86. Then Star Trek V is The Final Frontier, 1989. I don't know anything about this. Then 6, Undiscovered Country. Then there's Star Trek Generations, First Contact, Insurrection, Nemesis. I mean, none of these. That's 10 movies. I don't know anything about those.
I remember I've watched all of the TNG movies in the cinema. So that I remember vividly. In
You've
fact,
seen
I remember
all of those?
I've seen from Generations onward, I've seen all those movies, and I remember most plot points of all of them. It's the original series movies that I'm super fuzzy on and not even like aware of some of them.
So you've seen like Star Trek Generations with Patrick Stewart in 1994,
Yep.
right? Okay.
Yep.
Star Trek First Contact 1996, Star Trek Insurrection 1998, Star Trek Nemesis. All these are Patrick Stewart 2002. They're making these like
That's right.
clockwork. Every 2 years they were knocking one out.
They were, because they were doing really well, but then Insurrection started dropping off in quality, and Nemesis was absolutely terrible. So
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that's why there's such a gap between Nemesis for Star Trek movies in the theaters, where you don't see anything between Nemesis and then the Chris Pine Kelvin timeline reboot.
Yep. Yeah, that's 2009. So that's a very good word, the Kelvin timeline. Can you explain that to me? Help me understand, what is a Kelvin timeline that we go between the Patrick Stewart Star Treks, and then 2009 we go to J.J. Abrams, Chris Pine, Simon Pegg, and all those folks. How did it work?
So when you had the original series movies, and then you had the Next Generation movies, because there was a clear link, right? You had Shatner and then Patrick Stewart as the two captains, right? And they meet so that it's established that we're talking about one timeline, one universe, right?
Okay.
In the reboot, what they do is they go back in time. The movie starts off with Shatner's dad. And in that one, what happens is someone comes back from the future to stop Shatner and their crew from succeeding, and that creates a branch in the timeline because it's
a time traveler movie.
It's a time traveler movie in disguise.
Thank you, Back to the Future, for now also inspiring Star Trek movies.
Right. Right. So what that does is you now have a new Shatner, right? Or you have a new Kirk, let's put it that way, which is Chris Pine. And because you've already established that you had a universe where Shatner was James T. Kirk and Stewart was Picard, you now want to reintroduce Chris Pine as James T. Kirk. You do it in a separate timeline. And then they merge that and explain that separate timeline by having Leonard Nimoy's Spock come back into Chris Pine's timeline. Again, through some time travel shenanigans.
Wow.
And so that branch is now called the Kelvin timeline.
Why the Kelvin timeline? There's a dude named Kelvin?
I think honestly, and this is going to sound so silly, I don't remember, but it could be something as simple as saying the name of the ship was the Kelvin or something like that.
Okay.
There's some simple explanation for it.
Okay. I got it. Maybe a listener can fill us in on this. Let's crowdsource the answer. Yeah. So now if you're looking at the new Star Trek movies, now we're set. So again, chronologically, this is set well in the past. Yeah. Before the Next Generation, before Voyager, before Deep Space Nine, all of that, but in an alternate timeline. I can't find the reason for this, but I really want to understand what Kelvin means.
I mean, it's that unit of temperature. Maybe got something to do with it.
All right. Well, I'm hoping one of our listeners can fill us in on exactly the reason for this. Okay. So now we're in this reboot, following the Kelvin timeline, we're at movie number 4, correct? We had Star Trek, just called Star Trek, 2009. Yep. Then we had Into the Darkness. Then we had Star Trek Beyond. That was in 2016. So we went 2009, 2013, 2016. Okay, like some good 3-4 years between each of these, right? This is kind of following the Star Wars model. Now we haven't had nothing, and they're saying in 2023 we're going to have Star Wars 4? Doesn't seem possible. It seems like it's got to be like 2024, huh? If the cast didn't even know about this. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I mean, they say 2023, but unless they start filming this year, which, again, I don't know if they are or not. But if they start filming this year, they could definitely do it next year.
Really? Okay. Maybe I'm just so jaded because I'm still waiting for Mission Impossible and Top Gun to come out, and those are like 2023, and those were filmed like a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think because, my feeling is that most movies these days take anywhere from 30 to 60 days to shoot, or 30 to 90 days to shoot. And then the rest of the time is in visual effects, post-editing, and all that kind of stuff. So again, we're still in March of 2022. If they film, let's say within the next 3 months, if they start filming within the next 3 months, I don't see a reason why they can't release it at the end of next year.
Can you give me a guess? I'm looking at the numbers, so this is unfair. How successful in terms of box office do you think these Chris Pine Star Trek movies were, and compared to like the Disney Star Wars movies?
Nowhere near as successful.
Yes.
If I had to guess, I would say the movies, the current generation movies, made anywhere between 300 and 600 million worldwide.
Oh, Pete, this is going to hurt. Star Trek in 2009 made $257 million.
Worldwide or just the North America?
Well, it says gross.
No, but that might be a gross domestic versus a gross worldwide.
It should say this. I am on IMDb. Okay. I agree. That seems very low, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, but I mean, this is... Now you're talking about the cinematic impact.
Yeah.
I mean, in that regard, Star Wars easily outpaces Star Trek because, again, Star Wars is all about the pew-pews and the shooting and the warp drive and going faster than the speed of sound.
Are they more family? They're not more family-friendly, but would you say Star Wars appeals maybe because Disney is behind it versus Paramount? It appeals to... Do you think it just appeals to a younger generation? I feel like Star Trek is for not old people, but it's for adults,
Yeah, look, I don't want to make this sound bad, but I always think that Star Trek is more for intelligent adults and Star Wars is more for people who are like, I don't mind, I'm going to check my brain at the door and just watch 90 minutes or 2 hours of great action.
Yeah, that's probably...
And effects. And again, I don't mean this I don't mean to denigrate anyone fan of any of these franchises. That's not to say the Star Wars movies are dumb. They're not. But I think Star Trek movies are generally a little bit more sophisticated in terms of plot in general. I think that you're absolutely right. There's also an element of... How do we appeal to the children? How do we appeal to merchandising? How do we sell more T-shirts? How do we sell more toys with Star Wars than there is with Star Trek?
Yeah.
Right. And this goes down to like introducing Jar Jar Binks in the prequel trilogy, where I think it was, at least to me, being a cynic, I felt like that character was introduced purely for the hopes of creating a cute CGI character who's silly so that can appeal to kids. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Right? Going down to BB-8 in the sequel trilogy.
Yeah.
Or, some of the other alien type, or like the porgs, those penguin birds that we see.
I love the little porgs.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what I'm saying. Think of all the aliens you've seen in Star Trek versus Star Wars, which is more likely to generate merchandising sales. Yeah. Right? I'm not going to...
Klingons and Vulcans are not going to be inserted into... They're not cuddly stuffed
animals.
No.
Right? They're not something that I can buy for my child to cuddle with.
Yeah.
Whereas a Porg or, Jar Jar or any of these other CGI characters, I fully get that.
Yeah. Again,
that's me being cynical, but I just think that's what I think at the end of the day, these guys are going for, is how do we merchandise the crap out of our films?
Right. So let me update my numbers. You made a very good point. You saw through my smoke screen. I was talking about domestic box office. Let's talk about worldwide box office. For Star Trek 2009, the first Chris Pine reboot, right, based on the Kelvin timeline.
Okay.
Worldwide, 386 million.
There you go.
I mean, it's nothing to sneeze at, but yeah, I mean, compared to like what Marvel is pulling in, it's not really there. Then the second one, Into the Darkness, went up to 467, right? So that's a very good trend. We're almost at $500 million. That's real money. Then the third one, 2016, Star Trek Beyond, dipped dramatically.
It tanked, right? Yeah.
335, which is 50 million below the 2009 movie. I mean, we're not even. Yeah. I don't think we're adjusting for inflation and things like that. So I mean,
it wasn't even a great. Like, it wasn't a good movie, or at least I didn't find it to be as enjoyable. It was the most action-packed of the three of them. It was, it just felt, I don't know, it just felt off in that movie. It just felt a little off. And I think that probably explains the longer gap between between the release of the last movie Beyond and the green lighting of Star Trek 4.
Would you
because
say,
if I remember correctly,
go ahead.
When Quentin Tarantino said he wanted to do it for the fourth one, he said, look, my goal is to do something that's a lot lower budget and a lot more true to the original. And I think that's what got people excited, which was to say, hey, we don't need to see something bombastic. We need to see something good.
There's something else. I mean, you made a very good point, which is Star Trek is maybe a little bit more intended to be highbrow and, political intrigue and, academically stimulating, kind of compared to Star Wars, just like shoot it out. But Star Wars, there's a very clear good versus evil. And you kind of know like what the storyline is going to be. Whereas maybe one of the challenges for Star Trek, and I can't remember where Star Trek Beyond left off, to be honest, even though I know I saw it. What's kind of like the dynamic in Star Trek, right? We know in Star Wars, it's the Jedis versus, and kind of the rebels versus the Empire, right? Like that's always going to kind of be advancing, and that's kind of the backbone that you can always build things off of. For Star Trek, it doesn't naturally, apart from the Vulcans, or not the Vulcans, the Klingons, right? It doesn't really have this, like...
Oh, no, the Romulans.
The
not
Romulans.
Even the Klingons. Although you're not wrong, actually.
Yeah.
We haven't really been exposed to the Klingons or the Romulans in the Kelvin timeline movies.
Yeah.
And actually, in the second movie, the Klingons are introduced.
Yeah.
And they're introduced as the quasi-enemy, because this is before they've established peace with the Federation.
Yeah. I feel like Star Trek is missing that a little bit, They're always on a very interesting mission, and that's a little bit, I think, maybe the inspiration from the television series, right? Where there's a lot of missions, right? They're geographic missions or they're scientific missions, but they're not necessarily like a good guy versus bad guy type of scenario where everyone kind of gets excited and says, hey, we gotta see what happens and looks like insurmountable odds. How are they going to do it? It hasn't really maybe created that in the newer movies yet, right?
Yeah. And I think that's also one of the reasons why, as you rightly pointed out, they're probably a better fit for television than they are for cinema, because it's almost like a police procedural, or, like a legal procedural or a diplomatic procedural, which is to say every week there's some new tension that comes up during a routine mission or a routine part of their jobs, right? So, whereas in the movies, especially in these reboots, the villains so far have been, actually, I think in all of them, right? The main villain has kind of been themselves.
Yeah. It's always like a misunderstanding, right?
No, in the first one, it was the time traveler, right?
Yeah.
Who was trying to destroy Vulcan.
Right.
And in the second one, it was Khan, but really it was because Khan was being blackmailed by the admiral of the Federation. And then in the third one, it's this Idris Elba's character who was abandoned by the Federation. So in all of these movies, the Federation doesn't come out really great.
Much like Star Wars and the Federation, right?
How so?
I mean, didn't Star Wars always, in when you look at the episodes 1, 2, and 3, right? Wasn't there a lot of dissension?
Oh, right.
Among the Senate? I mean, right?
It was, but I mean, that was also like a bit of Darth Sidious playing the sides, right?
Yes.
He was always the evil guy pulling strings to make sure that he came out on top. So that's slightly where there's a slight difference there.
So where are we going with the television? Okay, so cinema-wise, Star Trek 4 has been greenlit. We're not sure when it's coming out, but it's going to be...
And we don't know anything about it in terms of plot. We don't know anything.
Yeah. But we know it's going to be kind of led by the Chris Pine and the Chris Pine crew, right? Which is probably Simon Pegg, Zoe Saldana, so forth.
Yep.
Television-wise... I think Discovery is still going. Picard is still going.
Yeah, season 2 just dropped.
Okay.
So I think they're doing it on a week-by-week basis. So I'm not watching any of season 2 until I think like it's 8 or 9 episodes in, so that I can kind of watch them all in one sitting / in one weekend kind of thing.
Are you watching it on Paramount Plus then? Right, because Star Trek is a Paramount property.
It is a Paramount property, but I think Picard is actually on Amazon Prime.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, so that's interesting.
Before Paramount Plus was a thing, Amazon had struck a deal with Paramount for its Star Trek property. So, for example,
that's interesting, huh?
So, for example, I recapped all of DS9 on Amazon Prime. I have watched and will continue to watch Lower Decks, which I think is great.
Oh, really?
On Amazon Prime. I'm not interested at all in Prodigy. I saw 1 or 2 episodes, but I wasn't keen on it. And again, Picard, I saw all on Amazon Prime as well.
Well, Prodigy is animated, right?
Yeah, Prodigy and Lower Decks are both animated. Prodigy is more related to Catherine Janeway. And Lower Decks is its own thing.
And then what about, there's something called Short Treks also.
Yeah, I think that was it was like a companion show to one of them. I think it might have been Prodigy. It might have been Discovery. It's kind of like I think it's only like 5-10 episodes, not much more. And they're kind of like a companion episodes to, I'm pretty sure it's Discovery, but don't hold me to that because I haven't seen it.
Okay, and then the next television series coming out is called Star Trek's Strange New Worlds. Do we know anything about that?
I do not. In fact, this is the first time I'm hearing of it, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Breaking news.
You've heard it here first. We're breaking it. Yeah, Strange New Worlds. But I don't have any more information on this, but apparently it's coming in 2022. It's listed on IMDb.
Okay. No, I don't. I actually don't know anything about it. In development.
Oh, Rebecca Romijn is going to be on it. Oh, John Stamos is old. Mystique.
Yeah, I don't know anything about this though.
Okay.
But it follows Christopher Pike. Oh, okay, there you go.
Yeah. So old. Yeah, and Spock is there. I don't know where this falls in terms of the timeline at all.
Well, if it's Christopher Pike and it's the Enterprise, it'll be post the original series and pre. No, actually, it'll coincide with the original series in terms of timeline. If it's Pike,
the original 1966.
As in terms of timeline, it'll fall or Chris Pine's with Kirk.
Yeah,
it should
that makes more sense.
Alongside that.
That makes more sense. Okay, so we're gonna have Discovery if it continues. We're gonna have Picard, at least one more season. Probably that may be the last season, though, right?
Of what, Picard?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I only
have
guess
no idea.
that because Patrick Stewart's quite old, right? I mean, I'm just assuming this isn't going to be a 7-season kind of commitment by him, right? So if we're at 2,
Right.
maybe he's got another 1 or 2 in him. We'll guess.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know because like he was already looking a bit
Yeah.
tired and listless in season 1.
Yeah. I felt the same thing and I felt the same thing in season. I mean, he's retired. I mean, the whole storyline is that, hey, I'm retired. Wait a second.
Yeah.
I made a few mistakes. There's some unfinished business. I'm going to go have like one last hurrah and try to fix these things, right? Save my crew. So I think just by definition, it's probably a little bit limited. Maybe they can squeeze out a 3rd season. You'll let me know how actually, we'll let our listeners know how the 2nd season goes. And then we'll make our prognostications or guesses as to whether they're going to do a 3rd season. But that's kind of what we're watching. Discovery, let's see if it's got any staying power. Picard, let's see where it goes. And then maybe that's why they said, look, we need to kind of, come up with something else, which is Strange New Worlds. And that would kind of also maybe play well off of this new, Chris Pine Star Trek 4 that's going to be coming out 2023, 2024, right? So they're kind of like simplifying the new, the cinematic and the television worlds. But historically, there's just a lot of content. But I think one of the other nice things about it is that you don't necessarily need to watch everything. Like Star Wars, it's really tough for someone who hasn't watched, the at least 4, 5, 6, right? It's really kind of tough to dive into The Last Jedi, for example, and really understand the stakes or what it means. Do you agree?
I wholeheartedly agree. That's the one thing that works against Star Wars versus Star Trek.
Yeah. I mean, I can say 2 things specifically. You and I have a mutual friend who has not seen 3, 4, 5, and they're kind of clueless on the nuances that you and I talk about, when we're talking about, what's happening with, The Last Jedi or something like this, right? Whereas,
that's even in fact our running joke, right? Is like we're gonna force him to, duct tape his eyes open, sit there with a whiteboard, and then force him to watch 4, 5, and 6, and then plot out the rest of the universe for him.
Yeah, and the second part is like if it's a date night, you can take your date absolutely to watch a Star Wars movie, and they just look at it kind of as a vacuum, as a standalone film, like, oh, that was kind of fun, like. That person's, a Jedi and that person's a bad guy and they had a fight and that's kind of the end of it. They don't appreciate, the storyline or the stakes as well. So, I mean, I think that's probably, one of the distinctions in terms of Star Trek versus Star Wars. That Star Wars, to really appreciate it, to really get not your money's worth, but to get the value from the film, you need to know the history. Whereas I think Star Trek, it would definitely help probably to see some of these Chris Pine films, maybe, 1 or 2 of them, just to kind of get a flavor of who is who. But you don't necessarily need to see Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a testament to, and to be fair, Disney's trying to kind of work themselves out of that situation with their TV series, right? Yeah. You don't have to have seen it. It does you nothing good or bad if you haven't seen 4, 5, and 6, and then you watch The Mandalorian. Having said that, of course, knowing the Luke Skywalker or the Skywalker saga in advance helps you appreciate it all the more when you see cameos and you get to understand who certain characters are when certain characters appear. But it's not. If I had never watched any of the sequels or any of the mainline Skywalker saga, so episodes 1 through 9, if I hadn't seen any of them, I could still sit and enjoy The Mandalorian. I wouldn't get some of the references, but that wouldn't stop me from enjoying the show as a whole, because as a rule of thumb, they've said, hey, Mandalorian, it's a standalone TV show.
So
right?
let me, I'm going to make it's not a hot take, but it's going to be a take that Disney has kind of worked itself into a very difficult position where, as you mentioned, it wants it in both ways. It wants the diehard Star Wars fans like you and I and a lot of our listeners to be super excited about The Mandalorian and House of Boba Fett because we know these characters and we want to see where it goes. At the same time, it needs to dumb them down or water them down a little bit so that, you know, people like my brother and sister who haven't seen them all can appreciate them and get excited about it. And that's a very, very difficult, you know, tightrope to walk, I think, which is to make it so that people are still interested in something that has no background to them, but still make it interesting enough to you and me that it's worth our time, right? And it remains loyal to the franchise, because if it's not loyal to the franchise, it's going to turn us off. And I think that's a very difficult tightrope for Disney to walk, right?
Yeah. And I would say that as a whole, Disney's kind of pulling it off. I caveat that because the latter half of the Book of Boba Fett was really, if you don't know who Luke Skywalker is, you're in trouble, right? Because 2 of those episodes kind of really focused on that. Right?
Yeah, and they had to bring the Mandalorian back, which actually undoes everything that they seem to be trying to do, which is make it stand alone.
Right, because then you have to have watched The Mandalorian to really get that. I agree. It's like they're painting themselves out of one corner only to realize they painted themselves into the other corner. Right?
Exactly right. They're like, hey, good work. We got out of that mess. And then they turn around. They're like, drat. We got another mess.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So, you know, it's an interesting dynamic, certainly. And I think, and to be fair, I think that really comes down to the success that they've had financially with the Skywalker saga, so they couldn't help themselves. In terms of story, there was more to tell. In terms of financing, of course, why would you leave that money on the table, right? Yeah. So you want to do more and more. But I think the way they really get themselves out of that is to start doing something similar to what Star Trek has done, which is to say, hey, let's do a couple of TV shows that are in the same universe. You can reference them at most, but you can't show them on screen. You can't spend more than an episode on them. We need to move on from Luke Skywalker. Yeah. We need to move along from Darth Vader. Yeah. We need to move on from Rey. We need to move on from Obi-Wan. We need to move on from all of these guys, right? Yeah. So that's the hope, right? And initially, I had high hopes because they had announced that they were going to do another trilogy of movies, not related at all to anyone that we know, but set in the Star Wars universe. And I thought, oh, that'll be really nice to see. And then those movies were canceled because I think there's a little bit of fear, which is to say, hey, if we spend $250 million making this movie or $500 million making this trilogy, and no one's interested because it doesn't have anyone wielding a lightsaber in it, will it be any good? Or, you know, like, how do we justify spending that kind of money?
I agree. I mean, that's really the blessing and the curse, I think, that Disney has with Star Wars, which is for Star Trek. I can't tell you how my dad would react, but I assume there wasn't a lot of fan blowback when they developed the Kelvin timeline and they kind of split off and said, hey, we're going to reboot. Now the character James T. Kirk is going to be played by Chris Pine. I don't really remember there being a lot of like riots or fan blowback about that, right? Whereas,
I don't either. In fact, I was quite excited.
If Disney did that and said, hey, make up your character, went back in time, and now pick your character, Christian Bale is going to be playing Luke Skywalker, I mean, there would be like anarchy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Would it? I mean, pick any actor you want, saying, okay, the role of Princess Leia is now going to be, I don't know, Anne Hathaway or whomever, right? It would be like berserk.
Yeah.
No
People
one would
lose
accept
their
that.
minds.
They would lose their mind. And that's
Yeah.
that's the corner that Disney is painted into, which is their intellectual property, their character is so well defined that they cannot create an alternate universe. Whereas Star Trek is a little bit weaker. Maybe over time it's become weaker, but they can probably create someone else who's Kirk now and do another Kelvin timeline. And the film will still gross $250 million, right? It'll still make 300, 450, just because it's Paramount behind it, and they'll do it well with J.J. Abrams, and we'll all kind of live another day. That's kind of the watered down IP that Star Trek franchise has versus a Star Wars franchise, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and we touched upon this a while ago, but I think that's why alternative media is going to be so much more important to Disney than it is to Paramount, because Disney is going to say, hey, okay, how do we introduce a new character or a new franchise in the Star Wars universe? Let's launch a TV show. Let's launch, or maybe not even a TV show. Maybe, let's do a video game. Let's do a novel. Let's do something else that kind of that lets us gauge people's reaction without having to do, a $300 million budget movie.
So that's a good point. When you talk about gaming, you're an Xbox gamer. Have you played any of the Star Wars games on Xbox?
I've played most of them.
I've played Battlefront 2 on Xbox. And
but that was, a debacle for all different reasons. But yeah.
But I actually, it was a debacle, I think, because of the loot boxes. Yeah. But in terms of the gaming and the storyline, to be honest, I quite liked it. I really quite liked it, I have to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was good. It was really good. There was in terms of the single player, there was very little relation to the rest of the Skywalker saga. There was a little bit of touch. A little bit. In fact, you got to play as Luke Skywalker in one of the missions. It's quite nice that way. Yeah. But it wasn't really about the Skywalker saga. They had their own mission to do, and that's it. Yeah. And it was also nice that you start off as playing as a bad guy, as someone who works for the Imperial forces, and then moving into the Rebels. Yeah, I thought it was actually quite good. I don't know that there's a Star Trek game, is there? For console, for PC? So there have been. Yeah. There hasn't been one in the last 10 plus years, but I think even when I was in university, there were a couple. I think it was one called Star Trek Elite Forces or something like that. Oh, really? And it was a first-person shooter. You were a member of an assault team, or like of the military arm on one of these on the spaceships, basically. It was not bad, actually. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't anything fantastic either. Or not super memorable anyway.
Yeah. I think that's where your distinction between Star Trek and Star Wars franchises makes a big difference, which is it's a lot easier to create a shooting game based around Star Wars, right? You can do Battle of Hoth. There's so many kind of like set pieces that are so iconic that it's easy to say, okay, let's do something with Hoth, the AT-ATs, the snow speeders, all these things, right? That Battle of Endor, there's just so many that just kind of write themselves, right? Whereas Star Trek, maybe it's better that you have a blank canvas, but there's really nothing that comes to mind when you say, all right, what exactly should it be? Shooting? Well, there's really no iconic guns. Or, there's a taser, right? There's like... Yeah,
there's the phasers. Yeah, and
like, are you going to be piloting a big ship through a wormhole? Like, there's just not a lot to do, I think, with Star Trek. Maybe for Star Trek, that makes it a more, strategic game, right? Where there's more missions, and you've got to figure things out. And maybe that makes it like a little bit more of a, one of those interactive mystery games, right? Where you have to unlock a little things and do puzzles and things like that. That might be more engaging. But I agree with you, which is both of those could probably move into gaming if they could create something a little bit compelling. Star Wars, I think, is ahead of Star Trek when it comes to that.
Yeah, certainly in terms of action. Absolutely.
Yeah, certainly in terms of action.
And then also having said that, the difference also was that, it being a far more successful financially franchise, at least, they've had resources, and they, Lucas created LucasArts, which was their own video games division. And they had created a string of games, some of the most successful RPGs and some of the most well-liked and revered RPGs are Star Trek ones, right? So
could we make a hot take and say the Star Trek franchise is really at a critical junction, that it's been bypassed by a lot of very new, franchises. And the time is now for it to really take advantage and make sure that whatever Strange New Worlds is going to be, whatever Star Trek 4 with Chris Pine and his team, are extremely successful, so that they don't just kind of like fall into irrelevance.
How?
Right? I mean, the entertainment world is so competitive right now. If Star Trek 4 is a flop, if the new series is not well received, is Star Trek like even anything that's valuable as a franchise? I mean, it's got a name, but I mean, it's just been kind of like treading water for a while then, right?
It has, but I think Star Trek, the one advantage Star Trek has over Star Wars is that it's not tied down to the story of one single family or one single person. So even if the Star Treks as we know it aren't successful, there's nothing stopping anyone from trying out, let's do a series focused on the Vulcans. Let's do a series focused on the Klingons. Let's do a movie that's all about the destruction of Romulus. Something like that, you know what I mean? Whereas everything in the cinematic Star Wars universe ultimately revolves around one of the Skywalkers.
So let's say you're a buyer right now, and you're out to buy a franchise. You have the choice of the Fast and Furious franchise, the Mission Impossible franchise, the Star Trek franchise. Is there another one that you think is kind of comparable? MCU is so big. And let's take MCU, let's take Star Wars out of it. Do you think there's another one that's comparable kind of to those three?
So
in terms of just a lot.
There was, but they didn't do a good job with it.
What's that?
But I think that Universal's Monsters series could have been excellent.
Monsters Inc.?
No. So they
Monsters?
did, they did King Kong. They did Godzilla.
Yeah.
And then they did that terrible remake of The Mummy with Tom Cruise and Sophia something.
Yeah.
That had the potential because they could have they wanted to do a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde movie, and they wanted to create what they called it, I think, the Dark Universe. So they were going to have The Mummy, they were going to have Van Helsing, they were going to have King Kong, Godzilla, all of these in one universe, right? And I think that had the potential, or maybe not Godzilla and King Kong, I could be confusing that. But yeah, so the Dark Universe was basically all these, like, the old school mythological, like, beasts and, not villains, but, like Dracula, all of these guys could have been in one universe. I think...
Was there a Minotaur? Was there a Minotaur?
I don't remember there being a Minotaur.
There should be. That would be...
I don't remember, but it was based on, like those old school Hollywood black and white movies, of Dracula and all that ilk.
Yes.
I think they had a great opportunity there that they really bungled to do an MCU-style shared universe or a DCEU-style shared universe. And they really bungled it because, again, they miscast and then they tried to introduce too many people at the same time. And it came apart, and it seems real quick. So in the Mummy movie, you had Tom Cruise, and then you also had Russell Crowe, who was supposed to be...
I kind of like The Mummy. I think The Mummy was not such a terrible movie.
It wasn't super terrible, but I don't think that it was great. And then on top of that, you have the reality is that Brendan Fraser is such a well-liked guy in the community, and his Mummy movies, well, at least the first, was really good. Like, I really enjoyed it. And so it was, it was campy, but not too campy. Yeah. And I think the current Mummy took itself a little too seriously. Yeah. And whereas the first Mummy movie was a little bit more jovial and didn't take itself too seriously and was like, look, we're a movie about a mummy, so we're not going to take, don't take this too seriously. This is a half comedy, half action kind of thing, So I think that would and the only reason I say that is because, again, I've got my finance and banking cap on. I think that would probably be the cheapest one to buy.
All right. So it's let's say it's not about the cost of them. It's what you think is the potential of them. So Fast and Furious, Mission Impossible. I'll give you your dark Mummy franchise and Star Trek's. Which of these do you think has the most potential going forward?
I still think it's Star Trek.
Okay.
I think of all of them because it's the same. It's Fast and the Furious is out. I mean, first of all, their franchise is almost over. Like, they're filming the last 2 movies now. And then, but even then, even if they say, okay, we want to do a reboot, it'll just be more cars. It'll be faster cars. It'll, like, they've already been to space. What else are they going to do?
Ocean.
So no, that's what my joke was. They're going to go back in time. They're going to somehow find a way to go back in time.
Oh man, Back to the Future once again influencing cinema.
Yep. So that's my joke for that. And then what else? Mission Impossible, same thing. Don't get me wrong. I love the franchise. I just don't see it without Tom Cruise. I think Tom Cruise is so influential to the franchise. I find it hard to find another group of 3 or 4 misfits / super agents who can do the same thing that Tom Cruise can do.
Can I throw James Bond in there as well? Would that change your answer?
Oh yeah, so James Bond, I'd like to do James Bond.
So you take Bond over Star Trek as a franchise?
I'd take Bond over a franchise. Yeah. I think in terms of
how much do James Bond movies gross? Do you have any idea?
No idea, but MGM, the James Bond franchise just got approved for sale to Amazon. And
really?
Amazon bought MGM for $8.5 billion.
Whoa.
It just got approved. And I think James Bond was also bought by Amazon. Right? And oh no, it was. Yeah, so the James Bond franchise comes in with the MGM deal, and so they spent $8.5 billion. It just got cleared from European antitrust regulators, so I think it's done now.
When are we going to see the announcement of who is the new James Bond? I haven't seen this yet. Right? After Daniel Craig, they haven't announced anyone yet, have they?
They haven't announced anything yet. I think it's because they're still in pre-production for the next movie, and they don't know what they're going to do with it. There was a rumor that Natasha Lyonne, the one who was James Bond's replacement in the last movie, was going to continue on. But I think critically, and again, for the wrong reasons, a lot of people were not happy with that.
I mean, I would like to see her in the movie, but I would also like to see someone replacing, Daniel Craig.
Yeah, and
I was voting for Idris Elba. I was really voting for. I mean, I'm still voting.
I think Idris Elba could have done it, but then you look at it, and Idris Elba also now. I think he's slightly older or the same age as Daniel Craig, so he's also in his 50s.
Yeah.
So if you wanted Idris Elba, it would have been maybe 10, 15 years ago is the right time for getting him.
Yeah.
The rumors were that Tom Hiddleston was in talks, but I just don't see Tom Hiddleston as James Bond.
Yeah.
But that could also, by the way...
Was he the guy... But he was in The Night Manager, right?
He was, yeah. He's Loki in the MCU.
Yeah, and he's Loki in MCU.
Yeah, so I think the only reason I don't see Tom Cruise as James Bond is because Daniel Craig played such a physical James Bond.
Yeah.
And so right now, my mindset on James Bond is that he needs to be a physical actor, and I just don't see Tom Hiddleston doing that. But having said that, if you think of the James Bonds before, I mean, Pierce Brosnan wasn't exactly known for being an acrobatic, hard-punching guy, right?
No.
And so, but he was a great James Bond. In fact, I really liked him as James Bond.
Yep.
So maybe Tom Hiddleston could be a good James Bond. I don't know.
William Shatner is still, going back to Star Trek, William Shatner is still alive, correct?
He is, yes.
And Leonard Nimoy died.
He did, unfortunately.
And the George Takei, who played Sulu, passed away, right?
George Takei passed away? No, he didn't, did he?
I thought so. Am I wrong on that?
I don't think so.
Is George Takei still there? What about the guy who played Scotty?
No, he's still alive. He's still alive.
Okay. Scotty?
No, Scotty is James Doohan passed away many years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
not
apart
much
from
of the original crew is left.
Yeah, so how old is William Shatner?
Oh, Michelle Nichols is still alive. So Uhura, she's still around.
Who's Michelle Nichols? Who did she play?
Uhura.
Oh, whoa. Do you think it would be, I mean, one of the last episodes we had, we talked about, I think it was during Batman, we said that movies are so long that there should be an intermission, right? And that was our idea to improve the cinematic experience. What do you think about for a movie like this or for Mission Impossible, if instead of like a preview, there would be like a 5-minute, like just recap of kind of like the prior films. You know, sometimes you see this like in a series, right? The last episode of whatever, and,
right.
And then they show like a few clips. What do you think if there would be like a very nice montage, just to kind of summarize what's happened in the past 3 Star Treks before now Star Trek number 4 starts?
So on paper, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that I don't know how much I would like to see that on the big screen because, as you just pointed out, I think it would make me think more of television where, like they always open up like 24 on the last episode of 24.
Yeah.
And then you hear what happened, right? Or you see what happened.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd want to see that. What I think I'd be more open to the idea of is, so like, why not do a trailer, right?
Yeah.
A preceding thing, which is like a small separate video clip not related to the movie that releases in the theater with the movie during the trailer segment and say, hey, by the way, here's a recap of what you saw.
Yeah, I'm open to that. But I mean, I think, I'm thinking for like Star Trek and also for Dune, right? I mean, there's going to be Dune Part 2 come out.
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do with that.
I mean, you and I are well versed in Dune. And to be honest, there's not a lot to like recap. But I also wouldn't mind if it could be done. I agree with you. I don't want it to be done in a television-y way where they say previously and Dune, and then they just show like a few 5-second clips kind of like spliced together. But if they, sometimes you do see it in MCU where I think they did it maybe even in Spider-Man, right? Where they kind of showed a little bit of the end of when he was in London and then how he got back to New York, right?
Yeah, but they integrated that into the movie really well, right?
Yeah.
You're right. They did show you a very, very, it couldn't have been more than a minute long of what happened.
Yes.
Yeah. Right? It was almost like a montage that led directly into the beginning of the movie.
I would kind of like this for, for some of those movies where there's just a lot to kind of like recap. I mean, for the Star Treks, of course, like you and I will like be updated, but even I'm not going to watch like the 3 movies all over again. It would be, maybe I'll watch the trailers for all 3. Maybe I'll read like a summary, but I wouldn't mind like that 1-minute integrated thing if it could be done very, very smoothly and a little bit seamlessly, just to kind of remind me of where everybody kind of, ended up and where we're starting from here.
Yeah, it would be interesting. It would be interesting. It also, I mean, because none of the movies are direct sequels of each other in the sense that the stories kind of finish with each one, how necessary is that is another question.
Yeah. I mean, right? Spider-Man played really well to that because it was a direct London to New York.
It picked up right where the second one left off.
Star Trek, we don't know. I mean, maybe I can't remember where Star Trek 3 left off, right? what's it
So
called?
Star Trek 3 ended.
Star Trek
so
Beyond.
in the movie, the central conflict for Chris Pine was he was getting tired of being a captain. He was getting tired of, I think he was into their 5th year of the mission of trekking across the stars, right? And I think his thing was he was putting in for a transfer, and he had already put in for a transfer to leave the Enterprise because he just didn't want to do it anymore. And, he was just, he felt jaded by it all and tired. That was the whole premise of that. And then, of course, the last mission kind of reinvigorated his love for the stars and for what they were doing. And so he cancels that. And that's how they ended the movie. Was they had, Sophia Boutella's character, Jalen or Jaylee or whatever, Jayla. They found her. She gets put into she joins the academy and she becomes like an ensign on the ship. They're having a party to celebrate. I can't even remember what they're celebrating. And they all kind of have a drink, and that's how they end. Like, they end on a happy note. That's why I didn't think they were going to have a 4th movie, was because it seemed very much like okay, we're done with the franchise.
But they can't be done with the franchise. I mean, all they can do is, okay, so let's imagine where we go from here. Do you think number 4 will be the last one for Chris Pine, and then they're going to have a new Kirk, or they're just going to have a new Enterprise?
Well, why not a new character? Why not a new why not a new Picard? Or if they want to do the reboot thing, why not a new Jean-Luc Picard?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or again, this is the beauty of the Star Trek universe, is there's so many different people they could redo, or there's just so many people they could reinvent or just invent in total, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't need to be about James Kirk. It can be about anyone else. It can be about a brand new character, or it could be about anything else. So I get that they want to continue making Star Trek movies. Great. I want to keep watching them.
So do
I. But it
I.
doesn't need to be about Kirk. It really doesn't need to be Kirk.
You're right. You're probably right. So is your guess will be the last one with Chris Pine in the James T. Kirk role?
Yeah. Well, again, yes, on paper, but then you know how Hollywood also likes to do everything in trilogies now. So maybe this is the start of a new trilogy, but I somehow doubt that, because that means another 10 years of being Captain Kirk, which is not going to be easy for all these guys.
Yeah. We should also have an episode on Chris Pine and talk about where he's coming from and where he's going.
Actually, it's
because you know what I saw.
Shape, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he used to be among the bright, right? I mean, the joke was the 3 Chris's, right? Chris Pratt, right? From Guardians of the Galaxy. Chris Pine.
Yeah.
And who was the third? Hemsworth, right?
So it's actually, of the 3 Chris's, he was the odd one out, because it was Chris Evans, Captain America.
Oh yeah,
Chris Hemsworth, Evans. Thor, and then Chris Pratt, Star-Lord, and then the joke
Pine
was
came.
Then Pine came in because he came in the DC universe, and they were like, "Well, he should have really come into the Marvel universe. He could have been the 4th Chris." Blah blah blah. But yeah, you're
right. Okay, so but you know that he's got the new movie out. You know, he's got the new movie out called The Contractor, which we can review maybe in a different episode. But apart from that, I can't remember what he's been in last. Can you?
I remember he had done the Jack Ryan series on...
Yeah, he did.
Oh, no, that wasn't him. Oh, my God.
Well, that was the guy from The Office. Yeah.
That was the guy from The Office. No, he had done Jack Ryan in the movie.
Yeah.
But the series on Amazon was actually the guy from The Office. What has Chris Pine done? I think the last thing I remember him from was Wonder Woman 2.
Oh, you know what? Until you said that, absolutely right. I forgot that he was in Wonder Woman 1984.
Which is, again, a testament to how bad how poorly they used him in 1984.
Yeah. And also, that's not a starring role. Well, he's been in both the Wonder Womans. He's been in both the Wonder Womans, huh?
Yeah, but at least in Wonder Woman 1, he had an impact, right? He was an important character in that.
Yeah. I mean, he was a very essential character. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I have to say,
his filmography, at least off the top of my head, I'm sure he's been doing work, but like off the top of my head, for an for at least for someone who I would have definitely considered an A-list star, I haven't seen much of him on the screen, and I don't know if that's by choice or not. Like George Clooney has made an active choice, right? He said, I don't want to be so much on the screen or behind the camera. He's not been in many things over the last 5 years, maybe a handful of projects here and there, right? But that's out of choice, and he still maintains his A-list status because of it. Chris Pine, on the other hand, I'm not saying he's not an A-list star, but like, if I'm struggling this hard to think of what I've seen him in before Wonder Woman, that's a problem.
I think if you took Wonder Woman and Star Trek out, I'm looking at his filmography on IMDb now, but if you took those two out, I could not name any other thing that he's been in. I've seen some of the movies, except Jack Ryan. Jack Ryan's Shadow Recruit. That was in 2014. Okay. I know. Hollywood is tough.
Hollywood is tough.
Right? I mean, you gotta find your franchise right away. You know? I mean, that's what makes, I think the career of Tom Cruise and even your spirit animal, Nicolas Cage, so impressive, right? So impressive is that it's a slog to always go out and win a role when there's a lot of competition, right? I mean, every movie that Tom Cruise has done, I mean, we talked about he never had a $1 billion movie. That's true, but he's been in a lot of movies every year, every other year, and that's how you become kind of A-list, is that you've always got something that you're doing. Whereas, Chris Pine is exceptional. But again, once you take these 2 or 3 things out of the equation, he's got a lot of things that he's listed for. But to be honest, I've never heard of them, or they weren't, significant roles.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, again, I really like him. Of the 4 Chris's, he's probably my.
Oh, that's tough though. All the Evans is very likable. And Hemsworth.
is, equally, if not more so.
And I have to say,
the two of them are tied for first.
And Chris Pratt is actually very likable. If you've ever watched Parks and Recreation.
Yes.
He's actually almost a totally different person in that show. I mean, Chris Pratt, apart from his Star-Lord role, I mean, his Parks and Recreation role was not huge.
But then he got Star-Lord, which he nailed, and then he's a part of Jurassic Park or Jurassic World. Oh yeah,
you're right. I forgot about Jurassic Park. I take it back. I forgot about Jurassic Park.
Right, yep. And then he tried to do a few other movies in between, which were like he had done that time travel movie. He had done, so he had done a couple other things in between. He's kept himself a little bit more relevant. Mm-hmm. Let's put it that way.
Yep. What do you think, Pete? Did we do justice to the Star Trek franchise today? Have we summarized it? Have we explored it? Have we gotten everything out there so that we're now ready to watch what's the new show? Strange New Worlds, Star Trek 4, whatever it will be called, and either take up Discovery or take up Picard.
Yeah. I will just say what I like about the animated show, Lower Decks, for example, I think is a great way to deviate from the Star Trek formula, which is, that super diplomatic, super thinky headpiece kind of movies or shows.
It's animated though.
It is animated. It's hilarious. Oh, really? It is a really good comedy.
Where are you watching it?
On Amazon Prime.
All right.
On Amazon Prime. So I think that if you really want to get into Star Trek, but you're not so super bothered about watching 12 seasons of a show, this is a great way to get into the Star Trek universe. And like it's funny, it's animated, it's comedic, it's serious. I think you'll really enjoy it.
Dude, you know what we have to do? We've been promising our listeners we would do this for a long time. We haven't done it yet. Now that we've got almost 30 episodes, it's almost time for us to start doing a ranking of the streaming services because now you're mentioning that you're watching this on Amazon Prime and I'm watching something on HBO Plus, and we've got we probably have enough data points that we can at least do kind of a preliminary model about what we think is now most popular, best value for money, and so forth, right?
Yeah, actually, you know what? You raise a really good point. So we're mid-March as we speak, as we record this. Mm-hmm. Why don't we do this? Why don't we have a Q1 report?
Oh, I love it. Let's make this corporate. End of Q1. Quarter ending numbers.
Let's do a 10K or 20F on Q1.
Yes.
Right? Let's do a recap of Q1.
Yes.
And what we can do at the same time for the listeners is do a very down and dirty of 2021. We can just see what shows we watched in 2021 so that we have a basis, because we probably don't have that many data points at this stage.
You're right.
And what we can say is year to date, Q1, this is where our rankings are for the different platforms. And, 2021, the full year 2021, we can give you a good rating, a good idea of that as well.
I think we should also publish our results, and on Films and Stuff letterhead, we should send it to each of our streaming friends and let them know how they fared.
Yep. And we'll, of course, let what's the Hollywood version of the SEC? The FCC.
No.
We'll let the
I thought it was going to be the Writers Guild, not the Writers Guild. The Film Actors Guild,
Screen Actors Guild.
Yeah.
The SAG. We'll send SAG a message. That's right.
No. Yeah.
You know what? We should just send it to everyone. We'll send it to the FCC. Heck, we'll even send it to the SEC. We'll send it to Disney. We'll send it to Warner Brothers, SAG, the Writers Guild of America, everyone who
Department of Energy. Cares. Let's just send it to Homeland Security. We find it a matter of national importance that you be aware that streaming service X is the best value for money.
As of Q1 2022.
As of Q1. Okay. These are unaudited results.
That's right. So that's actually not a bad idea. So let's do
that.
We'll save that. We'll do that for 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now. But sometime in April, we'll present to you guys our reports and our findings on where we think the streaming services are. And that should give you an idea of, we'll even give you our projections.
Oh.
And that'll give you an idea.
Yeah.
So that you can tell if this is something that, okay, I need to subscribe to these platforms over the next year or not.
I'm putting that in my notes. I got it. Wonderful idea.
Good. I like it.
Listeners, thank you for staying with us for however many minutes. I think we're 90 minutes into the segment on Star Trek and some other topics. I hope it was worth it for you all. It was a lot of fun for me, Pete.
I agree. I think it was great fun.
Thank you for your time, your contributions, and the research.
My pleasure.
All right, everybody. Have a great week ahead. We'll speak to you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.